Welcome to the One Hand at a Time podcast. I'm your host, Chris Welton. And those of you that have listened to my show, this sounds like it's on repeat, but I have another individual I met through a mastermind / coaching, group coaching program I was in with Ben Newman. And I share that with everybody, about every conversation we start with, because this is where you meet people, right? Like if you want to meet somebody that's trying to take it to the next level, get into a mastermind, get into a coaching group, get into some type of networking, and you're going to find like-minded individuals. So Allie invited me a few weeks ago to be in this kind of a spin-off day they would have for our group coaching we were in. And I jumped in there for a few minutes. We hit it off, and then we've been DMing ever since. But I want to welcome Allie Warren to the One Hand at a Time show.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here and share my story. And yeah, the Ben Newman group was super powerful. I was really impressed with just how connected we were in that virtual setting. I've been in, in-person mastermind groups, and you really had to lean in to get that connection. And I felt like we just had that organic connection vibe going on. So super glad to meet you. Super happy to be on here, and excited to see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, let's jump right in. So this is a question I ask a lot of people, and it's, you were born and then what happened?
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll kind of take you back to the start. So we'll just jump right in. It's kind of crazy. Mom and dad got married really young. They actually got married down at the hitching post here in town. And my dad was a narcissist, serial cheater, alcoholic, and a pathological liar. And my mom, she grew up in her own fair share of dysfunction. So they were sort of this like match made in trauma bond heaven. And then they had me. And a couple years later, they had my sister. And shortly after my sister was born, they split. And my dad was kind of on this tear to make my mom's life hell. So throughout my childhood, he would say nasty things about my mom, and it was really difficult to deal with. And then my mom ended up getting remarried, and my stepdad was a good stepdad, but not the best husband to my mom. So think explosive fights, him leaving, coming back a few days later. So I grew up in a little bit of dysfunction there, and it's interesting because I remember as a child thinking, like, this isn't right. Like, how can you do that in front of a kid? And how can you say those things about my mom? All those things. And so as you can imagine, my sister and I, from a very early age, didn't feel like we were seen and heard. But it was almost that catalyst that pushed me into sports and academics and overperforming. And I'm sure you hear a lot about this in kids with childhood trauma, as we become hyper independent and we perform to the max. So sort of the blessing in all of that is that I got really into softball and I was the best at it. And I just poured all of my energy into that growing up, and I ended up getting a college scholarship to go play at DePaul. And that was such an incredible experience because it got me away from home, out of my comfort zone, and kind of away from that family dynamic that would have held me back, right? But I kind of mentioned earlier that my dad was an alcoholic. So when I was a kid, and feel free to stop and ask any questions.
Yeah, no problem. I'm taking it all in. I got plenty of questions.
Yeah. So as a kid, he was a beer drinker. And when I got to college, I finally had the guts to stand up to him and tell him, hey, like, I'm an adult now. I don't want to hear any more trash talk about my mom. And I'll never forget, I went to the grocery store that day and my debit card got cut off. And so I took a stack of resumes, I walked down to Wrigleyville, and I got a bartending gig when I was 21. And we didn't talk for a few years, probably like almost 2 years. And in that time, he actually got diverticulitis, so he got really sick, stopped drinking, and he got healthy. And towards the end of my college career, he came back into my life, but ended up leaving Chicago right after I graduated college, basically, and came home, and he had started drinking again. But this time he had graduated from beer to hard alcohol because he had kind of found something that didn't irritate him as much. And that's when everything really, really started to go downhill. He got into a nasty relationship, and then once they split, is really when the demise started to become very rapid. So I was 24 years old. I'd gotten a job working in pharmaceutical sales, moved around a bunch, and I had gotten a promotion and moved down to the Bay Area, I think around the age of 24 and a half or so. And I remember my aunt died. And so we had to come up for her funeral. And I'm like, okay, Dad, I'm going to come get you on Saturday morning. And he's like, I can't go. And I'm thinking he's just drunk. And so I'm like, dude, sober up, right? But when I get home, I realize that he's in the hospital. And he thought he was having a heart attack. And I think he had a seizure, or he fainted and he fell into his coffee table. So I get to the hospital, and they couldn't run any tests on him because they had to detox him from the alcohol first. And I remember walking into the room, and he was full on hallucinating. And then he had to use the restroom. So I said, okay, I'll help you up. And the nurse comes in and stops me, and she says, no, he can't walk. And I'm like, oh, is it because of the meds? And she's like, no, he's a fall risk. Like he physically can't walk. And I'm like, what? And that's when I realized that the decades of alcohol abuse had finally caught up to him, and he was starting to lose function, particularly in his larger muscle groups. And it was crazy because they have a scale on the bed, and he weighed just as much as I weigh, around 160 pounds, but he looked like he was 250. He was all swollen, but his legs and arms were like sticks, right? And so I sat with him at the hospital for a couple weeks. I had a whole plan in place while they were detoxing him, and it was a nasty detox. I mean, they had to basically chain him to a bed and end up sedating him for a few days because he was fighting it about as hard as you could. And so he gets out of the hospital, and I said, Dad, come back down to California with me. I've got a rehab facility all lined up, and we'll get you help. And he said no, so I had to walk away.
Yeah.
And then a few months later, he ended up losing his job, and he was a director of national sales for a tech company. He did very, very well. And he called me that morning, and I just beelined it to the airport, flew up to Spokane, basically ambushed him. I had to keep him intoxicated so that he didn't seize or anything. And then I brought him down to California, checked him into a rehab. So at this point, it's like a 16-hour day. I get home. I'm like, oh, I did it. And they call me, and they said, you got to come get your dad. And I'm like, what? And they said, our campus is all uphill, and he's a liability. And I'm like, we've talked about this. And so I had to go back and get my dad, take him to the hospital. They safely detoxed him there, and then I brought him down to Southern California, where he would do several stints of rehab over the course of about 2 years. And, I'd drive down every weekend during visiting hours. At this point, they would just let me come whenever because they knew me after a while. And he would, gain his muscle function back. He still needed a walker, but, he'd significantly improve. And he was the guy in rehab. You're like, this is the 5% that's going to make it. And then he'd get on the airplane ride home, and he'd get drunk again. So after a few cycles of me coming back home, rescuing him, bringing him back down, I just said, I'm done. And he went back on his own a couple of times just because he had his buddies there. So they would encourage him to come back. And around 2020 is when kind of all hope started to get lost. He started isolating himself, and then basically didn't have any interaction with anybody for years up until the point that he had died. So it was August of 2020, and, I was trying to help him come see him. He wouldn't let me see him. And he started texting me really verbally abusive things. And the last words he said to me were, I hope you effing die today. And so I blocked him. And almost a year later on the day, if not the day, I remember laying in bed, and I don't have heart issues. I'm very healthy, and I'm just laying in bed, and my heart started fluttering very rapidly. And I took note of it. And then 10 days later, I was at a work conference, and everybody's texting me, hey, have you gotten a hold of your dad? I'm like, I haven't talked to him in forever. And I didn't realize why everyone was reaching out that day, but it dawned on me it was his birthday. So I'm like, oh, that's why everybody's trying to get a hold of him. So I literally looked over at my coworker and I said, I think my dad's dead. And my uncle calls me. He's like, do you want me to go check on him? I'm like, okay. And my uncle lives about 30 minutes away, and about an hour and a half had passed, and I just knew. So I'm at dinner with these executives, and I get the phone call. And I knew that it was over. And I didn't cry. I was like in shock, but I was also kind of relieved. Like he no longer had to suffer anymore. And so I fly up home that day, and my uncle, he was so frazzled. He found his own wife dead. So this is like round 2, right? And my uncle said, I couldn't find his wallet or his keys. And I'm thinking, my dad's like OCD clean. Weren't they just on his coffee table? And I'm thinking my uncle was just really frazzled at the time. And we go to his house, and it was like Skid Row in there. I mean, I'd never seen so much filth. And like I said, my dad was immobile. And so he was literally squatting in his bonus room upstairs. And he had actually been dead for about 10 days. So I don't know if you've ever seen those images of people sort of like kind of decomposing into the ground or into a couch or wherever they died. And it was interesting. There were all kinds of twists and turns. We're digging through all this garbage, find his wallet, find his keys, and then I find this card, and it says, I love you, my husband. And we're like, what? Did dad get married? And so we go into a panic thinking like, okay, who's this person in his life? And she lived about 2 miles away. We found a package with an address on it. So we go to the door, and an old woman, my dad was 55 when he died. An old woman opens the door. She's probably in her late 70s. And we're like, what? Like, who is this person? And I said, are you Jennifer? And she's like, no, Jennifer's not feeling well right now. But I go, we really need to talk to her. And she wheels out in a wheelchair. And we're like, I'm thinking, this does not make sense. How is this working out? You know, you're in a wheelchair. My dad can't walk. Like, how do you guys see each other? And it turns out they knew each other from 27 years prior, never spoke, and then met each other on the Nextdoor app. So they were basically online dating for a couple years. And really nice woman, very, very inspirational, very fit. She kind of looked like Hilary Swank. And I remember sitting down with her, and the first words she said were, yeah, your dad said he left me everything, but I would never do that to you girls. And immediately I was like, all right, game on. Like, we got to keep this person close. And so it was just crazy. She was telling me all these stories about, you know, how she'd been with my dad, and but she hadn't seen him, and he had like totally catfished her multiple times, made up a bunch of lies why he couldn't see her. And you're like, you're a smart woman. You know, what was your agenda here? And I knew how to get into all my dad's accounts, because this is actually the first time I'm telling this story, but I knew how to get into all my dad's accounts because of when he was in rehab. And he was paying her bills, ordering her all these things off Amazon, giving her money. And so it was a pretty stressful time because we didn't find a will, but we found these lock boxes, like suitcases. And there were 6 sets of keys, but we only found 5 boxes. So as you can imagine, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, is there a missing box that she's got? And am I going to get hit with, you know, a surprise?
Were they actually married?
No.
Okay.
They never got married, but they called each other husband and wife. And she's like, we were going to get married. She's like, your dad was going to sell his house and move into an apartment, but my dad's house was inhabitable. I mean, I literally had to bring in a team to essentially disinfect the place and rip all the flooring up and everything like that, right? So, and he was a pathological liar, like I said. So he said he had gotten an apartment and, you know, all these things, and none of it was true. So thankfully they did not get married. But my dad was still buried in credit card debt. He had cashed out everything. He had this beautiful home. So thankfully we were able to sell that, clear the debt. But that was really the catalyst for some of the most challenging years of my life ahead. So I ended up breaking up with my boyfriend of 5 years. You know, when he died, I just was like, you know what, time to make some decisions. If I'm not happy, I just need to run with it.
I want to go back to the childhood part of it.
Yeah.
So I'm the son of a drug addict. My mom was a heroin addict, and she passed away. She was 65 or 66 years old when she died. But I hadn't talked to her in probably, oh, 17 years before she died. My sister was very close with her and called me and said, "Hey, mom's got cancer of the liver from all the intravenous drug use, and she's not going to make it." So I hopped on a plane and went and said goodbye to her for myself. It wasn't for her, it was for me. She recognized me and she died the next day. I think that the childhood aspect of that, the things I went through, not knowing where my mom was, being shuttled around to different places and living all over the place. And I think that prepared me to operate and be at the level I am today. And I'm just curious if you feel the same, the lessons you learned as a young kid dealing with the alcoholic father, the extremist that he was, helped you manage the downfall of your dad towards the end.
Yes, because it helped me accept the outcome, knowing that there was nothing I could have done.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that is the integral part that my childhood played in kind of reconciling that trauma and that experience, and also knowing what my dad went through as a kid. His dad literally lived a double life and abandoned my grandma with 9 kids when my dad was 11. He was the youngest. And so my grandma's wearing all these hats. And I have a lot of empathy for my dad, and I totally forgive him because he did do the best with what he had, you know? And at that time, too, when he was my age, for example, like talking about your feelings and your trauma, it was so taboo. That was a sign of weakness. People don't,
Yes.
now, like, therapy's a buzzword, right? So I think that's how it helped me the most. And also just having the example of what not to do and being on the receiving end of that, it lit this fire underneath me, that, you know, it had to be me. That's actually the name of my podcast. Like, it had to be me to change the dynamic that I was born into and rewrite the story and legacy for our family.
Yeah, I feel I'm the one as well when it comes to that part of it. I've been through my challenges as an adult. I'm on my 3rd marriage, which is the best marriage. I've been with my wife for a long time now. I say a long time, it'll be 12 years next in 2 weeks. And didn't do the best job raising my first 2 kids. I mean, I was there. I didn't like leave or anything, but I probably could have been a better dad. But I had my first kid at 20 years old, you know, so I did the best I could, I believe. And now I have a 7-month-old son, Leo, and you know, I'm a different dad because of the lessons I learned previously. So you were starting to talk about how things you had a kind of a downward spiral after that, with like the relationship ended, like some other stuff. I'm just curious because I want to unpack that piece, and then I really want to focus on, and I'm hoping this leads into the reason you left the corporate America type of deal. Because I left corporate America, it'll be a year on the last day of August. So end of August will be a year ago. I walked away from a corporate job. So I'm just curious, was that the start of it, and what that looks like?
Yeah, it's interesting because it didn't go downhill necessarily right away. But I would say over time, the byproduct of not facing what had happened to me and disassociating, like I'm a master disassociator, it caught up with me. So it was the best thing that my relationship ended when it did. My ex wanted to move. We were on the cusp of making major life decisions together, and it probably would have resulted in marriage, right? And I just, in my heart, I'm like, this isn't right. And if maybe I only have 25 years left, right? I'm not going to spend the next 25 years, you know, just kind of happy or trying to get to baseline all the time like I was. So I break up with him. I end up moving back home, living with my mom and my
home is
stepdad.
where? Because you said home a few times.
Spokane,
Where's
Washington.
Home? So you're where at?
Washington.
Spokane, Washington.
Spokane, Washington.
Okay.
I now live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which isn't too far from there. But
Yeah.
I move home, handle my dad's affairs, live with my mom and stepdad for 5 months, and here's the overperformer in me. I have the best year I've ever had in my career. So I win President's Club Rookie of the Year, Sales Excellence, and I completely dominate. Life was actually good. For the first time in my life, I moved into my own place with no roommates, and I have this beautiful apartment in North Idaho on the lake, and I'm making all these friends. I'm super happy and really just gaining my confidence back as an individual, gaining myself back. But then I was just so focused on what's next, what's next, what's next. Like I just wasn't present. And again, I wasn't handling my trauma. I wasn't giving myself permission to grieve because my dad didn't die in a noble way, and he caused a lot of problems with people in his life, you know. So I didn't talk about it. I didn't want anybody to feel bad for me, and for me it was almost this like sign of strength. If I can overperform amidst, in the midst of all of this, it makes me look better, right? So
Makes you look better to who?
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So that's my own trauma and subconscious programming sort of bubbling up to the surface. And one of the weird trauma responses I had was this obsession with being perfect. Like I've always presented myself well, but this was on another level. Like my spending was getting out of control. I had to have a new outfit for everything. It was like this facade. I can't even explain it. And I think a lot of it had to do with the defeat of losing my dad and wanting to just control everything in my life.
I want to step in on that for a second because I find it so interesting that a Division I college softball player was trying to be perfect, because you know that if you are bat 300, you're one of the best there is, right? So like think about that, and like I got to be perfect, but if I bat 300, I get a D1, right? Like so it's so crazy how our mind tries to trick us that everything has to be perfect. I'm really bad and have been for a long time about the outfit piece. Like I've got to have a new suit every conference I go to. Nobody remembers what I had on last time. Even when I give a keynote, like they don't remember, but so it's like I find myself chasing that piece too, and I think that's to feel better about myself internally, which can be good and bad. So so as you're doing that, you're chasing this perfection, right? And it sounds like money, you made good money, so that made you feel better about yourself, which is, I feel the same way. Like when I have 7-figure years, I'm like, I'm the man. Like, you know, you can't, like, whatever, right? And what was it that clicked and said, oh, like, what was there something with a family member else that happened? Like, I'm curious what clicked to make you realize that, man, I'm on the wrong path right now.
Good question. So this is where it gets interesting. So a few months after I move into my new apartment, I meet this neighbor, and he's a nice guy, but he started just walking into my apartment. And I remember one day I was literally getting dressed and he just walked in, and I'm like,
What?
whoa, what are you doing? And again, huge red flag, disrespected boundaries. And I kind of said, hey man, like, please don't do that. That's not okay. So he backed off, he apologizes, and he had a lot of charisma, and eventually we become friends, and it becomes this joke, right? And I'm like, he's harmless, cool guy, whatever. Well, eventually, we kind of start seeing each other, and I end up catching him with somebody else. And so I said, okay, leave me alone. So we don't talk for a while. And then he would end up circling back. But shortly after I got rid of him, my sister calls me one night, and I'm going to be careful what I say here, but she didn't hurt anybody. I'll preface it with that, but she did something that was pretty devastating. And so my life was just kind of like falling apart. This is when it kind of started to fall apart. And I had to step in as somewhat of an interim parent for my niece almost overnight. So I'm totally overwhelmed. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to work? And it wasn't a long time that I had to do that. Luckily, she was able to get out of her situation.
It's a good thing she had you, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
you didn't have the parents to fall back on, right? So good
Yeah.
thing she had you. So,
Yeah. But she got out of a situation consequentially, but I don't want to say she improved personally and in her behaviors. She kind of just kept repeating the same things. And so, a few months later, the neighbor circles back around, and he had finally broken up with his girlfriend, that I caught him with, ex-girlfriend. They were still seeing each other, and he was really emotional, and it seemed like he had sort of shifted, so we became friends again, and then eventually started seeing each other again, and it was great until it wasn't. I ended up taking a job in the medical device world, and I am on, like, the beginning of 2023, I am like at an all-time high. I'm like, I got it figured out. I got this guy that I love. I've reached the pinnacle of my career. I'm going to make all this money. Like, I've done it, and I thought I was on the other side of things. Well, right around the time that I started that job, he started to get verbally abusive. And I remember thinking, like, how could you call a woman that? And then he would always write it off as a joke. And after a couple instances, I said, I'm not going to tolerate this. We need to break up. Obviously, he talked his way back into the relationship. And a week later, I caught him cheating again, and I took his phone, and I threw it off my balcony, and he ended up hitting me. And then it was interesting because I was in such shock. The first thing I could think to do was call my mom and my stepdad. And I love my parents, but they have their own trauma. And I'll never forget my parents coming over, and instead of my mom saying, "We're getting you out of here, this is not okay," she went down to his apartment and talked to him for 3 hours. And I remember having to pull her out of there. And then, I wouldn't see him alone. And then he asked my parents if he could get together and talk with us. And I think he was terrified of what we would do. And so obviously he's trying to, save himself from any consequences. And that didn't last long. So I end up splitting up with him. And in the process, my job gets very, very intense. I stepped into a territory that had been split, and then the largest health system in the territory went up for competitive bid. And so my job was literally on the line. If I got the deal, I would be rolling in money, but if I didn't, I literally wouldn't have a job. So I just poured everything I could into my career and completely lost myself. It was extremely toxic. I had a very toxic counterpart, poor management, and I was working my tail off, and clinically I won the deal. I had all the endorsements of the surgeons and all the things, but my competitor priced me out by millions. And so I get to the end of this year, right, 2023, and I'm tens of thousands of dollars more broke. I'm spiritually and emotionally broken. And I remember it was August of 2023. I was driving down to surgery 3 hours away, and I was like, what happened to me? Where did this girl go? Like, the one that dreams big, the one that's growth minded. Like, I didn't have a growth minded bone in my body, it felt like. And it just felt like I was carrying all this weight. And I literally, like, yelled out, like, God, I need a favor. Like, help me. And within days, all these things started dropping into my life. And I ended up learning about a mastermind here in Coeur d'Alene that I joined. And that's when my life really started to turn around. And eventually being around higher frequency people is what gave me the confidence to leave the toxic situation I was in at work, because I had done all that work, lost the deal, and it was for nothing. I was financially, spiritually, emotionally, and even physically devastated. And I remember my manager saying, there's no bad territories, just bad reps. And she gave me a stupid high quota. And I just remember saying, this is no longer, a long play for me. I'm out. And I just thought to myself, never again am I going to be devalued in that way. But it really took me being in the deepest pit of my life for me to make that change. And so, yeah, from there, I quit my job and I just said, I'm going to shoot my shot at entrepreneurship. And at that point, I had built this amazing network of people that were helping me to get clarity in the path that I was on. And so I started doing a little consulting, made a little bit of money doing that. And then my passion is interior design. So I started my interior design business. And that was right around the time that I joined the Ben Newman group. And then Ben Newman kind of inspired me to start this podcast that had to be me. And then shortly after that, one of my greatest mentors in life, he brought me an opportunity to be a franchisee for a business networking startup. So all these things started to just kind of commingle together. You know, I already loved to network. And so I became a franchisee for that. I'm growing our chapter here in Coeur d'Alene, and the interior design business is taking off. And, you know, but really it was losing myself in the worst ways possible. And, you know, I had evolved into this person I wasn't proud of anymore. Like, I wasn't dialed in my life. I had become reactive, and I felt like I was a magnet for toxic people. And I was like,
It sounds like you let external things define who you were internally. Like, money defined me on how much money I made. And that was me. Like, when I was 29 was the first time I made $1 million in a year. And I thought I was like invincible. Like, I had a 7,000 square foot house. I had 6 cars. I thought I was going to be on MTV Cribs. Like, I was like, that's what was my whole goal, was to get to this point. Then when I made that much money, I spent the next couple months sitting in my basement. I was living in Indiana at the time, sitting in my basement playing PlayStation and smoking blunts every day. That's literally what I did, because I was like, I made it. And then next thing I know, I was broke. So I had to figure out something, right? Like, so I was letting these external things decide how I felt about myself inside. And I think, I'm curious, first of all, what's your burn? Do you connect with your burn?
My burn is honestly my dad, you know, like knowing that I'm here for a reason and I had that experience for a reason, because I'm the one that has to, like, the buck stops here. Like, when I think about my burn, I think about that quote, the buck stops here, and it had to be me. So those are sort of my taglines that I return to.
Yeah, I mean, my burn's my son CJ. I don't know if you've seen the videos and stuff I've done about him. He passed away in 2020, but he's my burn, and I connect with him every day. And I mean, there's a tattoo on my arm that says CJ's watching, and I connect with him often. I'm curious, when you get into a tough spot now, or something's not going the right way, are you able to pull back from, you know, lessons in the past of athletics? Like, because you played on a high level, right? I mean, like, I coached travel softball for a long time, and I understand how crazy that sport can be. I mean, I was a high level baseball player, but I enjoy watching, don't tell anybody, college softball more than I do baseball.
It's so fun. Yeah.
And if people say that they don't, then they've never watched it. That's the way I look at it. But do you pull lessons that you learned from sports back into where you are now to help you move on and overachieve?
Yeah, you know, the thing I love about baseball and softball, there's so much carryover into the game of life, right? And one thing my college coach used to say is, you have to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And he would consistently put people in uncomfortable spots. For example, someone would have he was notorious for doing this. Someone would have a 3-2 count, and he'd just pull the batter and put in a pinch hitter. And they'd have to figure it out. They had one pitch to figure it out, right? And I will say, like, I seek out uncomfortable things intentionally, because when you continue to exercise that muscle, you gain a tolerance to being uncomfortable. And so, yeah, I really do treat my new journey as a sport, and I really focus more on alignment and balance, because I was so out of balance. And it's crazy, because it's taught me a lot about when you're chasing money and things that are fleeting, Like the more money I make, the more money I find to spend. And I'm sure you can, relate to that as well.
Yeah.
But
I'll share a story with you real quick. So,
yeah.
and I posted this recently. It was from a keynote that I gave in Charleston, and I was actually asked to come on. I was asked to speak about money. My background, I do have some background in finance, and so they wanted me to talk about money. And I was talking about the stories of growing up the son of a drug addict. But I told a story about I used to go on Sunday mornings and play basketball at this men's club in downtown Indianapolis. Like it was super exclusive. Like I didn't know how exclusive it was, but the guy that was a member there would sneak me in. So I had no idea what it took to get in. It's called the Men's Athletic Club. And I went in there one Sunday morning, and John Hubler was the guy I was playing with, and he's about 20 years older than me probably. And I was just struggling, like having a tough morning. He goes, "What's up, man?" I said, "Man, I'm just having a hard time paying my bills. Like I'm really trying to, I'm a single dad. Like I'm trying to pay my bills. Like I'm working really hard, but I just am not getting it done." And he looked at me, and he's the only person I've ever let call me Chrissy. He calls me Chrissy. He said, "Chrissy, we're all broke just on different levels." And this comes from a guy that 2 weeks before that, I was at his brother's house in South Florida on a 70-foot yacht on the intercoastal going down to the Keys. Okay, so like this guy's a multimillionaire, owns several car dealerships, and he's telling me we're all broke just on different levels. So unless we figure out what money really does for us and how we can not let money control us, I don't care how much money you make, you're going to be broke.
Yep. And what I was doing for so long is attaching my safety to money. And
Yeah.
that is a very dangerous thing to do, right? Because like I said earlier, money comes and goes. And, when we go back to my childhood, even, emotionally, I was just never safe, right? And so I had to anchor myself to something. And if it wasn't sports, it was money, right? And so I had to learn the hard way, placing my safety in things that were providing me with a false sense of security. And now I feel like I am rich and abundant not because of money, but because of all the people I have in my life who are literally, I feel like everybody I'm surrounded by is conspiring to help me win and get ahead. And it's crazy, but I had to face myself and have a multitude of mirror shattering moments before I could get to this place.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be willing to accept it. So, like, I think one of the most powerful things about that is those people have probably always been there, but you wouldn't let them in, right? So I can go through stories of people telling me what a jerk I was when you made all this money, you were this and that. Like, and you know what? I probably was. Like, I was probably an asshole. I probably was. Like, I'm not going to deny that. But losing it and then figuring out how to earn it all back changed what I thought about money and the way I use it as a tool now for good and not evil. Like, right? Like, and look, there's so much to be said about the rooms we're in, the circles we run in. The average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. And here's the cool thing about that is that it doesn't have to be the 5 people you spend physical time with. It could be the 5 people you listen to the most, right? Like I listen to John Maxwell a lot. Eric Thomas is one of my guys I listen to a lot. And I feel like they're kind of in my circle, right? Because I spend so much time absorbing what they have to teach. So I can help other people. So I'm curious how you connected with Ben Newman. Like, well, we didn't talk about that. Like, where did you come across Ben?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier that I was a part of this mastermind here in Coeur d'Alene, and one of the people that had hosted that mastermind, he had worked with Ben Newman. I want to say he was in the first round of coaches to coaches, so he brought him.
Is it Ashwin?
No, it was Eric Rock.
You don't know Eric, okay?
Yeah, so he brought Ben up to speak, and I'll never forget. First of all, Ben's command of a room was incredible.
Yeah, he's pretty good, right? Yeah.
And I don't cry often, but he brought me to tears. I felt like he was speaking directly to me when he was talking about the story about his dad. And his dad was on his deathbed twice. And the first time he said, I just wanted my dad to tell me he was proud of me.
Yeah.
And then the second time, he was like, his dad said it, and he realized I didn't actually need to hear that from him. And I just lost it, right? And so afterwards, I go up and speak to him, and I'm like, hey, I'm early in my entrepreneurial journey. I would love to do your Coaches to Coaches program. And it's like he saw me, you know, that's who Ben is. I mean, he's the guy that will reach out to you on social media, check in on you. He's watching, and it's so impressive. And he's also like such a normal dude, you know, he's a human being. And so that's what I love about him. And I love how he shares through storytelling. So I end up joining Coaches to Coaches, and man, what a powerful experience. It dropped in right when I needed it to, because I was super empowered after quitting my job. And then I'm like, okay, now I got to figure this out. And he really helped me to start getting on track and getting back into a routine. And because I had to show up for him every day, you know, or for every week, right? And I had to show up for our group every week. So that really was the catalyst for a lot of things taking on in my life, just exercising discipline and him getting me into the right frame of mind to take on this entrepreneurial journey, because it's not easy.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about that, and congratulations to you for not getting a scarcity mindset and understanding you needed to invest in something like that to help you. Like, so many people will go, well, when I get to this level, I'm going to get coached. When I get to this level, I'm going to do this. And they don't realize they're setting a ceiling for themselves. Like, they're never going to get to that level, or if they do, that's it. So why would you, you know what I mean? So investing in yourself is a big deal. I do it a ton. I have 2 coaches. You know, I'm in a pretty good sized mastermind. I go to a few events a year that are, I go to the right events now. I used to go to everything. I go to the right events now. And then I seek out people I want to meet when I'm there. Like, it's not just the stage people. Like, I want to meet X, what, these people are on my list. I'm going to meet them when I'm here. So those always turns out well. So what's going on since Coach to Coaches? Are you still implementing the stuff you've learned? Like, is it helping you with your business? I'm just curious how you feel about it.
Oh, 100%. Like I've actually taken his, you know, the visualization checks, and I've written myself checks, and just like a lot of the frameworks, if you will, that he uses, like standards over feelings, it's really helped me to discern how to pivot and when to say no to something, right? I use that example when I'm referring back to my job that I took in med device, because I actually got turned down for a better role initially, one that would have paid me well, but I got told no because I didn't score high enough on one of their tests, their like personality tests. That job wouldn't have been the right fit for me, I don't think, but I got told no, fought my way back into the interview process, which traditionally they don't open that door back up because they're very strict on, you got to pass this Gallup interview, right? Fight my way back. The hiring manager says, hey, I want to hire you, but I have an internal candidate already lined up. So I said, okay. He goes, but you can go over to the best division within this company and work for them, and it's an incredible product. So I go talk to that manager, and I said, look, I'm not leaving for anything less than this dollar amount. And she's like, well, you'll build up to that, but worst case, in the first year, you'll make X amount. I'm like, okay, I can manage. But I took a significant pay cut, knowing, you know, bare minimum, I would make significantly less, because I needed to hear the yes, right? And I allowed my feelings to override my standards. So now I really got clear on my values and my non-negotiables. And obviously you have to make compromises sometimes, but I think that I have a much better discernment over situations, and that really helped me, because especially when you need to make money as an entrepreneur in your early career, you want to say yes to everything, and that's something that's really helped me to stay focused on the things that are truly aligned.
Yeah, I'm all with standards over feelings, and Ben has become my guy, and you know, the one Jordan is how I connected with Ben, and I built that relationship with him, and you know, he's, I don't know. I mean, it feels like I was supposed to be in a relationship with him, and and he reaches out to me all the time. It's crazy. Like my friends are like, man, Ben Newman's calling you on your phone right now. I'm like, yeah, I talk to Ben all the time. Like we literally have conversations, not just in coach to coaches or whatever. Like we have become built some type of a mentor slash friendship outside of that. So it's been really cool. Like he called me as soon as he got Tim Tebow committed to doing the boot camp, because I'm a big Gator. He reached out to me. He's like, Welton, you're not going to believe who's speaking in Puerto Rico. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I can't even think of who. He goes, Tim Tebow. I'm like, oh my God, that's so good, dude. So good. So I'd already bought my ticket before that anyways. I was going to be there regardless. But so those relationships are cool, but it's nice to see you're so not right. Ben's a nice man. There's nothing exceptional about Ben Newman. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but like he's not 7 foot tall. He didn't win the Heisman Trophy, right? He just knows how to connect with people. So for me, I feel like I could do the same. For Allie, I feel like Allie could do the same. If we're willing to put in the work and the effort, and he gave us the roadmap to cut 5 or 10 years off the time frame to get there, right? Like I'm 51, I'll be 52 next month. I left my job last year, a nice cushy job where I really didn't have to do that much anymore. Because I wanted to be different and do something different and do on my own terms. So I need to cut some few years off that. So that's why I did the coach to coaches and some of the other stuff I've done, because I needed some roadmaps to get there.
100%. Yeah. And back to the investing in yourself. I got a little crazy with it for sure. But I don't regret any of it because I knew that I would get the ROI, right? And I think a lot of people, they don't know what ROI, they can't define ROI. And so for me, I've just really leaned into every single process. And the thing I love is that I'm not the smartest person in any of these rooms. And what I've realized through it all, in placing myself in these environments, everybody has imposter syndrome. Kind of like what you said about we're all broke, just at different levels. I would raise my hand and ask questions, and people were like, thank you for asking that. I'm like, well, why didn't you ask it? But sometimes the higher up you go, you don't want to ask questions because you don't want to risk your credibility. You're like, I might sound stupid. And I'm over here like, I don't care. I'm just getting started, right? And so it's taught me a lot about success and how to be grounded. And like John Maxwell said, like I just met him actually the other day. It was super cool, awesome dude. But when you're successful, you have to have these anchors to keep you grounded, right? So that you don't upper limit yourself and lose your conscious, and create a gap between your subconscious and your consciousness, right? And so I think seeing people like Ben is just a reminder of like you can be successful and also be grounded and stay true to who you are and your values.
Yep, I agree. I won John Maxwell. I don't know if you know that or not, but I did send. Yeah, so John and I actually have a personal relationship with John. I could text him right now and he'd respond to me, and because I sent him one Jordan, and he actually started teaching this thing called the people pile, how to get out of the people pile. And he used Chris Welton and one Jordan as an example. And people would call me or text me from events. They're going, hey, John Maxwell's on stage talking about you right now. Before I'd ever met him. But I'd send him the Jordan and we'd talk and stuff. And I went and saw John back in the spring, I guess. And I was in a room and I walked up and introduced myself. I said, I'm Chris Welton, one Jordan guy. And he stopped the whole room. And he told everybody the story. He took his phone out, Allie, and gave it to someone because he wanted a picture with Chris Welton.
Wow.
What?
Unreal.
John Maxwell, the GOAT, wanted a picture with me. Not me a picture with him. He wanted a picture with me.
Wow.
Yeah. So, look, we've all gone through a bunch of shitty stuff in our life, and it's not a competition, right? I had someone tell me the other day it wasn't the Olympics of suffering. That's not what it is. Everything we've gone through, we've made it through. Here we are, right? What are you going to do with it? You know what I mean? What are you going to do with it now? Who am I going to help? Who am I best qualified to help? Well, you're best qualified to help somebody who's just like you a few years ago, right? That's who you're best qualified to help. And find strength in the stories that we used to be embarrassed to share. I didn't tell anybody when I was a kid my mom was a heroin addict. Like, that would never, ever, ever come up. I think they knew. They were just nice to me and didn't say anything, right? So, well, let's wrap it up here, Ali. I think it's been great to share your story. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to come on here and kind of just hear what we got going on. And what's next for Ali?
Just keep moving forward every single day. Like, even if it's a fraction of a percent, keep moving forward. That is all I do. And, being in environments with people like you, talking to people like you in the podcast space, like, this is what keeps me going. You got to keep a pulse on things and just continuing to keep a pulse on my healing, right? The more you do that, the bigger leaps that you make, because you're not trying to make up ground from before, right? So if I had any advice to anybody, stay on top of your healing and your inner work, and beautiful things unfold when you are consistent.
Yep, I agree. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to connect with Ali?
Yeah, so my personal page is awarren44, AWARREN 44, and then all my links to my other pages are in my bio. So go ahead and check that out. Follow me, and reach out if you want to work with me in any capacity.
Yep, we'll have all that in the show notes. Everybody knows that. And hey, thanks for being on the show today. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. That was awesome.
Thank you for tuning into the One Hand at a Time podcast. Please make sure you like and share the episode. And we'll see you next time here at the One Hand at a Time podcast. Make it a great day.